The German city of Nuremberg had been a symbol of Nazi power for years. It was the place where Adolf Hitler had staged his grandiose rallies, where Nazi propaganda had been broadcast to the world. The city represented everything that was wrong with the regime and the cruelty it imposed on its people. However, by mid-April of 1945, Germany was on the brink of collapse, and Nuremberg was about to fall into the hands of the advancing Allied forces. The German commanders stationed in Nuremberg expected to defend the city for weeks, maybe months, but they couldn't have been more wrong. The American Third Army, under the command of General George S. Patton, would prove them wrong in less than 5 days. On the morning of April 16, 1945, as the first light of dawn broke over the city, Patton's forces launched an assault on Nuremberg. The German defenders had fortified the city, preparing for a prolonged urban battle. They had set up their defenses along the city's medieval walls, positioned troops in strategic locations, and prepared for a siege they thought would last for weeks. But Patton had other plans. His strategy was one of speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. There would be no lengthy bombardments, no waiting for the perfect moment. He would attack from all directions, moving faster than the Germans could react, creating chaos and confusion at every turn. And that's exactly what happened. By the end of the first day, American forces had already breached the outer defenses. The German defenses, which had been fortified for months, crumbled in a matter of hours. American tanks appeared in sectors that the Germans thought were secure, and infantry forces attacked from unexpected directions. The speed of the American assault caught the Germans completely off guard. Within hours, German commanders were scrambling to understand where the Americans were coming from and how to stop them. They were completely out of their depth. The Germans had expected a methodical, cautious attack, like the British forces had used in the past. They thought Patton's army would take its time, slowly grinding down the defenses. Instead, Patton's men attacked with overwhelming speed and precision. They didn't wait for the perfect conditions. They attacked now, while the Germans were still trying to figure out where the main assault would come from. By the time the German defenders realized they were under attack from multiple directions, it was already too late. Within 3 hours of the initial assault, American forces had broken through the outer defenses at multiple points. The Germans tried to move reserves into position, but Patton's forces were already on the move, attacking new objectives before the Germans had a chance to respond. Von Holtz, the German commander, had expected to be able to shift reserves to key positions, but Patton never gave him the chance. As soon as the Germans thought they had stabilized one area, the Americans attacked somewhere else. This was Patton's tempo warfare in action. Attack faster than the enemy can react. Keep moving forward without pausing, and never give the defenders a chance to regroup. By noon of the first day, German radio communications were in chaos. Reports of American tanks and infantry behind German lines flooded in. Units that had been assigned to defend one sector were being attacked from another direction. American forces were already inside the city's perimeter, and the defense plan that von Holtz had spent months preparing was falling apart. The defenders were now fighting isolated battles, with no coordination, no reserves, and no hope of reinforcement. The psychological impact of this speed was just as devastating as the physical damage done to the city. German soldiers, many of whom were already demoralized by the state of the war, were left wondering where the reinforcements were, why they weren't receiving support, and whether they were going to survive the battle. By the end of the first day, Patton had already moved into Nuremberg's outer districts. German defenders were still trying to respond, but their attempts were futile. There was no central command, no clear leadership, and no way to respond to the fast-moving American forces. Patton was attacking so quickly that by the time the Germans could send reinforcements, the Americans were already moving forward, cutting off any hope of coordination. By the time the Germans realized they were losing the battle, it was already over. On April 17, 1945, just one day into the battle, American forces had advanced so far into the city that they were beginning to push toward Nuremberg's symbolic heart, the Nazi Party rally grounds. This was the place where Hitler had held his massive propaganda spectacles, where the Nazis had declared their vision of a 1,000-year Reich. Patton knew that capturing this site would have a massive psychological impact. It would shatter any remaining German morale and send a clear message that the Nazi regime was finished. The road to the rally grounds was a difficult one. The city's narrow medieval streets, lined with old buildings and barricades, were perfect for German defenders to set up ambushes. But Patton wasn't interested in fighting through these streets. Instead, his forces bypassed the defended routes, using combat engineers to blast new paths through the rubble and bombed-out buildings. Tanks and infantry moved through the wreckage, appearing behind German defensive positions and bypassing the strong points where the Germans expected them to fight. The Germans, focused on defending traditional routes, never had a chance to stop the Americans. By the morning of April 18th, American forces had reached the rally grounds. Soldiers posed for photos in front of the massive swastika that had dominated Nazi rallies, sending a clear message that the Nazi regime was finished. Nuremberg, the city that had once been the heart of Nazi propaganda, was now firmly in American hands. In just 3 days, Patton's forces had shattered the city's defenses and taken control of its symbolic center. The rapid fall of Nuremberg sent shockwaves throughout Germany. If the city that was supposed to be the last stand of the Nazi regime could fall in just a few days, what did that mean for the rest of Germany? But Patton wasn't finished yet. His forces continued to advance, pushing into the heart of Nuremberg and taking control of key positions. The castle on the hill, Nuremberg's ancient fortress, was the last significant German stronghold in the city. But Patton wasn't going to waste time with a prolonged siege. His forces pounded the castle with artillery for an hour before launching a final assault. The defenders held out for 6 hours before they were overrun, but by that evening, Nuremberg was fully secured. The speed with which Nuremberg fell was a testament to Patton's military genius. His relentless assault had shattered the German defenses, broken their morale, and crushed any hope of organized resistance. The city that was supposed to be Germany's last stand had been reduced to rubble in just 5 days. The fall of Nuremberg was a victory not just for Patton and his men, but for the entire Allied effort. It showed the Germans that no city, no matter how well defended, could hold out against the speed, aggression, and tempo of Patton's forces. The battle for Nuremberg was a brutal one, with intense street fighting and vicious resistance from the German defenders. American infantry had to clear buildings room by room, facing snipers and machine gun teams at every turn. Tanks had to fight their way through narrow streets, where they were vulnerable to ambushes. The Germans used Panzerfausts to destroy American tanks at close range. But Patton's speed and ingenuity kept his forces moving forward. And by the time the city was secured, German resistance had effectively collapsed. The aftermath of the battle was chaotic. The Americans were left with a massive number of prisoners, many of them elderly soldiers and members of the Hitler Youth who had been pressed into service in the final months of the war. Processing these prisoners while still fighting in the city created logistical challenges for the Americans. But Patton's solution was simple: assign minimal forces to guard the prisoners and keep the rest of the troops advancing. The battle for Nuremberg was far from over, but the city was lost to the Germans. The fall of Nuremberg had far-reaching consequences. The symbolic victory sent a clear message to the rest of Germany. The war was lost, and there was no chance of victory. As American forces continued to advance into the heart of Germany, German commanders knew they were fighting a losing battle. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. The city that Hitler had once declared would be the heart of the 1,000-year Reich had fallen in less than a week. Nuremberg was no longer a symbol of Nazi power. It was a symbol of their defeat. Patton's victory at Nuremberg was a textbook example of his aggressive combat philosophy. His use of speed, surprise, and overwhelming force had shattered the German defenses and changed the course of the war. In just 5 days, Patton had proven that urban warfare could be won with tempo and speed, rather than lengthy sieges and slow advances. His victory at Nuremberg set the stage for the final collapse of Nazi Germany and paved the way for the Allied forces to push deeper into the heart of Germany, one victory after another. By the end of April 21, 1945, Nuremberg was firmly in American hands, and the Nazi regime's days were numbered. The city had fallen in just 5 days, and the psychological impact of that victory would resonate for years to come. For Patton and his men, it was just another victory in their relentless push to defeat the Nazis. But for the rest of the world, it marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's 1,000-year Reich. As the American forces tightened their grip on Nuremberg, the momentum continued unabated, with Patton's army pressing forward relentlessly. With the city now secured, the realization that the Nazi war machine was crumbling under Patton's speed and aggression began to dawn on the remaining German forces. Despite some pockets of resistance still holding out in the city, the psychological impact of the defeat was immense. Nuremberg, once a symbol of Nazi strength, had now become a symbol of its complete and utter destruction. By the time American forces had advanced through the narrow medieval streets and reached the castle on the hill, any semblance of organized German defense was crumbling. The castle was now the last major German stronghold in the city, and Patton's forces were determined to capture it quickly. The remaining defenders, a mix of Waffen-SS troops and Volkssturm units, understood their situation. They had been fighting a losing battle for days, and the city's rapid fall had taken a toll on their morale. Yet, many of these soldiers were fanatically determined to fight to the death, given the looming prospect of surrender or execution at the hands of their SS commanders. Despite this, the situation for the Germans was already dire. General von Holtz's strategy, which had relied on holding key points and fortifying defensive positions, was utterly ineffective against Patton's unrelenting tempo warfare. The Americans attacked with overwhelming force from multiple directions, preventing the Germans from reinforcing their critical positions. It was only a matter of time before the last holdouts in the castle were overwhelmed. Patton knew that prolonged sieges only prolonged suffering. His battle strategy had always been about rapid advance, and he wasn't about to change it now. With artillery providing a constant barrage on the German positions, Patton's engineers cleared the rubble, and infantry and tanks stormed the castle from multiple sides. It wasn't a fight for hours or days. It was an all-out, concentrated effort to break through in one final push. The defenders, despite their zeal, were soon outgunned and outmaneuvered. The castle's ancient walls, which had once stood as symbols of Nuremberg's strength, now crumbled under the sustained American assault. German units fought back fiercely, but their efforts were futile. After 6 hours of intense combat, the last German forces inside the castle were wiped out or captured. The American flag flew over the city of Nuremberg by April 21, 1945, 5 days after the assault had begun. Though the city was now in American hands, the cost had not been insignificant. The urban fighting had taken its toll on both sides. The dense cityscape, with its narrow streets, old buildings, and rubble-filled terrain was a nightmare for tank crews and infantry alike. American forces, too, suffered casualties. Tank crews had to maneuver cautiously through alleys and bombed-out streets, aware of the ever-present threat of German anti-tank weapons. Infantry soldiers faced the challenge of clearing building after building, knowing that every corner could harbor enemy resistance. The battle for Nuremberg, while fast-paced and decisive, was also brutal and costly. The fierce fighting had been necessary, however, for the symbolic and strategic significance of Nuremberg. The rally grounds, the very heart of Nazi propaganda, were now under American control. The psychological victory was immense. The Nazi leadership had made Nuremberg the center of their twisted vision of a 1,000-year Reich, and Patton had shattered it in a matter of days. The sight of American soldiers standing in front of the iconic swastika banners captured in photographs for the world to see was a victory in itself. It sent a clear message that the Nazi regime, which had once seemed invincible, was crumbling, and the war was drawing to a close. As the American forces prepared to advance further into Germany, the impact of their rapid success in Nuremberg was felt across the country. The fall of one of Nazi Germany's most symbolic cities shattered the myth of German invincibility. For the first time in the war, the Germans realized that their defenses, no matter how heavily fortified, could be crushed in mere days. This realization spread quickly throughout the German military. The fall of Nuremberg marked the end of any hope for a miraculous German victory, and the collapse of morale was widespread. Resistance in other German cities began to crumble faster after Nuremberg. News of the city's swift fall reached every corner of the Third Reich, and many German commanders who were still holding out in other cities understood that further resistance would be futile. The once feared Nazi regime was collapsing, and many of its soldiers, disillusioned and exhausted, began surrendering or fleeing. By the time the city was fully secured, Patton had already set his sights on his next objective. His troops, having gained significant ground in Nuremberg, were now poised to continue their advance deep into the heart of Germany. While other Allied forces were still struggling to capture individual cities, Patton's rapid advance had already opened up new opportunities for the Americans to push deeper into the country. His reputation for speed and aggression had once again proven itself to be a decisive factor in the war's final phase. The Nuremberg campaign had demonstrated not just the effectiveness of Patton's leadership, but also the superiority of American tactics in urban warfare. His forces, operating with precision and speed, had shattered German defenses and captured a city that had been considered impregnable. In doing so, Patton not only secured a critical victory for the Allied forces, but also delivered a blow to the psychological core of the Nazi regime. As American tanks rolled through the streets of Nuremberg, the world witnessed the symbolic end of the 1,000-year Reich. But the consequences of the battle went beyond just military victory. Patton's success in Nuremberg had far-reaching strategic implications. By capturing the city in just 5 days, the Americans were able to quickly transition to their next objectives, bypassing the prolonged sieges that other forces were still facing. The rapid pace of the battle also allowed Patton to maintain the initiative, ensuring that the Germans never had time to recover from one defeat before the Americans struck again. In the days following the city's capture, the full impact of Patton's victory began to sink in. The propaganda value of Nuremberg's fall was immense. The city, once a symbol of Nazi power, was now in American hands, and the world would never look at it the same way again. The rapid collapse of Nuremberg and the manner in which it fell changed the course of the war in the final stages. It showed that the Germans, despite their fierce resistance, had no answer for the speed and aggression of Patton's Third Army. As Patton's forces continued to push forward, the reality of the war's outcome became clearer. German resistance was no longer an insurmountable obstacle. The collapse of Nuremberg had shown that the Nazis, despite their earlier successes, were on the verge of total defeat. The American victory in Nuremberg would be remembered as one of the defining moments of the war, a testament to Patton's brilliance as a strategist and his ability to lead his forces to victory when others thought it impossible. In the aftermath of Nuremberg's fall, Patton's forces continued to push through Germany, liberating city after city. But the psychological victory of Nuremberg lingered. It had shown the Germans that their defenses could be shattered, that the tide of war was turning, and that the Allies were unstoppable. The lessons learned in Nuremberg would shape future military doctrine and would be remembered as a shining example of the power of speed, precision, and overwhelming force in warfare. The war was almost over, but Nuremberg's rapid fall would forever stand as a testament to the effectiveness of Patton's unconventional tactics and his ability to lead his men to victory when it mattered most. As the final days of the war approached, the collapse of Nuremberg sent shockwaves through the German military. The once unimaginable speed with which Patton's forces had taken the city proved that the Nazi defense was no longer viable. In the wake of the battle, German resistance across the country began to collapse at a quicker pace. Soldiers who had fought fiercely in the past were now surrendering or fleeing, disillusioned and realizing the inevitable defeat of their regime. Patton's tactics had proven decisive not just on the battlefield, but psychologically. The rapid fall of Nuremberg had shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility, proving that even the most heavily fortified cities could fall quickly when confronted with overwhelming speed and aggression. His use of tempo warfare, attacking before the Germans could respond, bypassing strong points and maintaining constant pressure, became a hallmark of his strategy that would influence military doctrine for years to come. As Patton's forces continued to advance deeper into Germany, they encountered less and less organized resistance. The city of Nuremberg had been one of the last major strongholds of Nazi morale, and its swift fall marked the beginning of the final unraveling of the Third Reich. The American victory didn't just shift the military balance, it also had profound effects on the psychological and moral fabric of Germany. For German soldiers, the reality of their defeat became undeniable. Many commanders, who had once fought with fierce loyalty to the Nazi cause, now recognized the futility of continuing the fight. The fall of Nuremberg had accelerated the collapse of the Nazi regime. By the end of April, Patton's Third Army was well on its way to securing other key cities in the heart of Germany, while other Allied forces were still bogged down in the slow process of taking individual cities. The speed with which Patton had captured Nuremberg gave his forces a decisive edge, allowing them to maintain momentum and press on toward their next objectives. Nuremberg's fall had proven that Patton's aggressive, fast-moving strategy could not only win battles, but could collapse entire defensive systems before they even had a chance to fully mobilize. The psychological warfare that Patton waged during the Nuremberg assault had far-reaching consequences. When the world saw American soldiers standing in front of the Nazi Party's rally grounds, the very site where Hitler had staged his grand propaganda spectacles, it was an unmistakable symbol that the Nazi dream of a 1,000-year Reich had been shattered in a matter of days. It was a symbolic victory that resonated far beyond the walls of Nuremberg. On the front lines, as Patton's forces pushed forward, there was a palpable sense of inevitability about the outcome of the war. The capture of Nuremberg was just one step in the inevitable collapse of the Nazi regime. It showed the Germans that their once vaunted defenses were now useless against the speed and aggression of the Americans. Each city that fell thereafter was marked by the same rapid pace of advance and overwhelming force. Patton's victory in Nuremberg would go down in history as one of the defining moments of World War II. His tactics, leadership, and the relentless push of his forces proved that victory was not just about firepower, but about speed, surprise, and maintaining momentum. The battle demonstrated that a well-executed, fast-moving attack could shatter a city's defenses before the enemy had time to organize a proper response. It was a brutal, decisive victory that marked the final stages of the war in Europe. For Patton, the battle was a confirmation of his long-held belief in the importance of aggressive action. He had always stressed the need for rapid advances, and in Nuremberg, that philosophy had paid off. The city that had once been a symbol of Nazi strength had fallen in less than a week, and the psychological blow to the Germans was immeasurable. The Allies now knew that the Nazi war machine, despite its desperate efforts, could no longer hold back the tide of defeat. As the war in Europe drew to a close, Patton's forces continued to advance, liberating city after city and crushing any remaining pockets of resistance. But the fall of Nuremberg had already sealed the fate of the Nazi regime. It marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's dream of world domination, and the collapse of his Third Reich was now inevitable. The American victory at Nuremberg had proven that speed, precision, and overwhelming force could bring about the downfall of even the most entrenched power. In the years that followed, historians would look back on Nuremberg as a pivotal moment in the closing chapters of World War II. The fall of the city, so rapid and unexpected, had proven that even in the darkest days of war, momentum could change everything. Patton's victory had set the stage for the final collapse of Nazi Germany, and his aggressive tactics would be studied and emulated by military strategists for generations to come. For the men who fought in Nuremberg, the memory of the battle would live on. They had participated in a moment that would shape history. Their victory wasn't just a military success, it was a psychological turning point that shattered the illusion of Nazi invincibility. The fall of Nuremberg would forever stand as a testament to the power of speed, aggression, and the determination to press on when others might hesitate. It was a victory that had changed the course of the war and had set the stage for the final defeat of the Nazi regime.